So, hi, I'm Paul. Some people know me as Paul Cat's Cradle because when I'm not talking about future-facing design, we do a space and we have people like Chris and Marcus and all these people come and speak in our space. So I feel quite privileged to kind of be asked to come into somebody else's space and talk about this kind of stuff. Is that better? Okay, cool. So I'm going to start, and then Kieran, when he gets back onto site, he'll come and join me. Basically, what we've titled the piece is Future-Facing Design, and we're talking about principally an idea called Cradle to Cradle. There's also some terminology called the upcycle, and there's also circular economy. There's lots of stuff that's kind of going on at the moment. Basically, a little bit of history about why I do this talk. Some years ago, between 2005 and 2009, I did a master's at the Centre of Alternative Technology. And there's an ever-growing family of people that have gone through CAT, as we kind of familiarly call it. And I came from a place that was, the reason I started doing that course, because I was like looking for something positive to do. I was looking for something like a solution, because I'd been an activist, I'd been out on the streets, I'd been like telling people how bad this stuff is, but this stuff has been pretty bad for quite a long time. It's kind of escalating to kind of like unknown territory at the moment, but the environmental movement has been out there since the 70s saying, we need to start to look at at chemicals, we need to start to look at the way we do things, and we're getting to this kind of pinnacle, we're getting to the edge of the cliff, I think, at the moment with all this kind of stuff. And a lot of the environmental movement, it's quite negative, the way we have to communicate these kind of stories. It's like, don't you realise how bad this stuff is? And try and get people to change. Now, I was doing that stuff because I was really, really scared. I used to have like really what I call my scared eyes. So I'd go out there and I'd tell people, they're killing whales, they're doing this thing, they're fracking, what's going on now, it's like people going out there and saying, don't you realise how bad this stuff is? Surely this is insanity, we need to do something different. And most people would kind of agree with you, and then kind of shrug their shoulders, and 1% of them might say, well, okay, they might be inspired and they might join the campaign or whatever, but ultimately the majority of people would either make glib comments or they would just kind of look at you blankly. And and I just felt like I wasn't really having a huge impact in the world. These were great campaigns. It was like, why, this stuff's really serious. How come it's not affected you in the way it's affected me? So this used to scare the crap out of me, And then when I was doing my master's at CAT, I was told a story, which is this story. I was given a book to read, which is this book, called Cradle to Cradle, and it's entitled Remaking the Way We Make Things. Now, when I read that book, it talks in a different kind of language. It doesn't talk in this kind of scared language. It talks in a language that uses terminology like abundance. Now, when we talk about abundance, the reason that we can talk about abundance is because we look around ourselves and we see what's going on in the rest of the planet, not the human part of the planet, but in the rest of the planet, i.e. what's happening in nature. And all of nature has huge abundance. It's like if you look at a tree, it's not efficient in any way. It just grows there, it's doing all these things, it's creating habitat. When it blossoms, it doesn't go, oh, I wonder if I can have just 4 blossoms, or I don't, what if I have 3 acorns? Maybe that's a good way to kind of continue the line of this great oak tree. It goes, how many blossoms can I have? How much of this abundance can I give back in the hope that maybe one of these little acorns might grow into a great oak tree? So it's kind of a much more inspiring, kind of positive viewpoint of the world, and it's very much like a lot of the things that we've been hearing in the talks before. It's like cooperative. It's when that acorn's on that oak tree, it's not just there to create a new species, a new generation of oak trees. It's creating habitat for all these insects and all these other things. It's sequestering carbon. you know, occasionally some mad person comes around and cuts it down and burns it, but it's doing like really good things. And even if we do cut it down, sometimes we can make it into beautiful buildings and we can kind of lock it into things. Now this started making me think, when I started reading this book about remaking the way we make things, surely like making something with a future, maybe that's quite a good idea. So at the moment we have things like recycling, which if you read Cradle to Cradle, what they say is actually a lot of recycling is actually downcycling. What we do with a lot of materials is we collect them together and then we think, oh my God, what do we do with this thing? We've got this massive pile of stuff. It used to be a bottle, it used to be this, it used to be that. What do we do with it? Oh, let's make it into something. So we make it into a park bench, and we go, oh, this is great, we've recycled this plastic. We haven't actually recycled it, we've actually downcycled it in the system, because what we've done is we've taken something that was fossil fuel, it was synthesized, it became a very complex product in the system, and then we turned it into a park bench, mixed in with lots of other different kinds of plastics. So what this is all about really is a little bit more thought into the process. So there's terminology like intelligent design, there's terminology like intelligent material pooling. It's like, why don't we think, if we keep all of this kind of plastic in one stream, keep all of this kind of plastic in this stream, maybe when we make this kind of plastic into something, we keep it simple, so we don't mix it with the other kind of plastics. Or why do we not use this stuff at all? So you do a complete analysis of what it is that you're actually doing. So some kinds of plastics are very, very useful, like polyesters and nylon. They actually cycle really, really well, as long as you don't put any toxicity in with the nylon. So if you go, actually I want a blue, a pink, a yellow, like a purple, one a glittery one. If we just think, actually, what is it we're trying to do here? It's like, oh, it's a water bottle. Let's make this water bottle out of this particular kind of plastic, and then let's make sure that that particular material goes back into a useful cycle. So you start to think of a design that gives value in the future. Okay, and this is very important, because what we're trying to do here is we're trying to say quality is really important. When we make things, even like things that are made to be kind of single use, they're actually really high quality. Like I'm always astounded that, you know, you could go buy a pudding or something and it's in a container that's going to last for millions of years, and it's like you put it in your microwave, you eat it, and then what, you recycle it. But it was really, really highly technical, this thing that enabled this pudding to get to you for this particular moment. So what we're talking about here is we're talking about like rethinking, and this is, let's say, the subtitle of the book. It's rethinking the way we make things. It's not saying we've got all this stuff, let's look for a way to use this stuff in a better way. It's actually saying, let's go right back to the beginning of this thing and say, what is it we actually require at the start? So do we even require this thing? Because often lots of these products and stuff, they're kind of things that the supermarkets dream up for us. Do we actually need pot noodles and, like, you know, all this kind of stuff? They're great for camping, but, you know, really, do we actually really need it for our survival on this planet? Don't know. But basically what it does is it starts to make you think and ask questions. So you'd ask the question of, what is in that pot noodle? It's actually some food. So you wanted to go to a festival and you wanted to feed yourself. So you thought, oh, pot noodle, that's really cool. I can just put some hot water in it and I get to feed myself. It's not really very nutritious, and you've created this whole kind of waste stream thing. But maybe there's a better way. Maybe there's actually a different way of doing this. Maybe spending your pound on something else. I don't know. So I don't think there is a cradle to cradle pot noodle, by the way. This is quite interesting. What there are in the world is quite a few companies now that have heard this story of cradle to cradle, and they've started to look at how they fit it into their business model. It's like, how do they provide you with this product or this service or this thing that they used to sell to you. Because at the moment, their main motivation is making money. So what they do is they go, I've thought this idea, I've got this great new thing. How can I make it as cheap as I can, then create some kind of trickery to make it seem attractive, and then sell it? And then somebody comes along, they buy this thing, and then they go, okay, you bought it, it's nothing to do with me anymore, I've got no further responsibility here. So what we say is actually, maybe there's a different way there. Maybe there's a way of providing the service. If you provide a service to somebody, you also provide some kind of feedback into this transaction. So you might not sell a cheap hand drill, and this is actually a real case where B&Q have said, why do we sell cheap rubbish like drills to people when majority of the time there's hundreds and hundreds of thousands of these cheap drills out there, and most of the time they've only ever been used for something like 15 hours or something, and everybody's got one. Actually, if people only require 15 hours of drilling, maybe we can provide them with 15 hours worth of drilling rather than sell them a cheap drill. So the CEO of B&Q have stood up and said, maybe we can rethink the way we do this. Maybe we can actually provide that service. I've got a question from the handsome man over there.
Hello, hi. I'm Kieran van den Bosch, the other guy doing this talk, a bit late, but I've been thinking about B&Q for a while. I just had to get up and say this because an upcycle to the cheap shit drill problem could be, well, I've got this little brand that I came up with to sort of try and sell B&Q, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to tell you instead. Basically, rather than selling shit cheap drills by the 1,000 or million or however many they turn over, why not sell the drilling time? Why not sell the drill as a product we can hire out and the drill can come back? But I thought a way to upcycle this even further, I'm a property maintenance guy, have a van, drive it around and fix stuff at people's houses. So I thought, why don't B&Q go that one step further, and rather than, so an upcycle for their business, where they could probably make just as good a money, would be to say, well, we'll start helping these man with vans, and they will operate locally and they will actually hire out the drills. So they'll basically be a man with a van who's really affordable because they got the backing of B&Q. I mean, I haven't thought about all the actual how it would work, but that's the general idea, is saying, right, actually, we provide you not a crap product that you're going to use once a year. We're going to provide you a nice guy with a van who's going to come round and he's going to actually be kind and he's going to go, yeah, we can fix that. And that's an upcycle, surely, because that's got a community aspect as well, because it's got a person involved with the drill who knows how to do the job, not not someone who doesn't know how to do the job. Okay, so that's all I wanted to say is my little B&Q. I've even got a name for it, but I'm going to keep that one to myself. All right, Paul.
No, that's absolutely brilliant. And the thing is, that's exactly the kind of thing that starts to happen, because I think it was in 2006, there was a film made called Waste Equals Food. These Dutch guys heard this story and they went, my God, we've got to tell people about this stuff. So they made this film, Waste Equals Food. They showed it at like 7:30 on primetime Dutch TV. The Dutch went, absolutely, this is exactly what we need to be doing. And now they're way ahead of us. As our transition communities have set up and have come up with kind of principles of how we go through transition, Dutch communities have got together and they've said, how do we interpret these stories, these ideas, this framework, which we call Cradle to Cradle? It actually originated from a set of principles called the Hanover Principles, which was written a little bit before that, which was like 1996 or something like that. How do we use these principles to define what it means to live within our community? And there's communities in Limburg which Kieran and I actually went and visited some stuff out in Limburg and Maastricht and around there, and it's quite incredible some of the stuff that's starting to happen. But they're thinking about it in the same way, because they think about it as a cooperative way of doing business. So when one business sets up and says, actually, I'm not going to be a waste business anymore, I'm going to be a nutrient business. So this idea of intelligent material pooling, there's like a European-wide waste company that looked at it, heard this story and went, actually, we're not a waste company anymore, we're a nutrient company. And we don't exist at the bottom anymore. We don't deal with your debris and your like kind of stuff that you don't know what to do with anymore. We're actually right at the top of this chain. We're actually a logistics company where we go and say, well, what byproduct of your process is there? And who needs it? So they start to move things directly between symbiotic businesses where people start to kind of collect businesses cooperatively around a material. So one business might set up and say, this is what we're going to do. So they need a certain product, a certain material to do it with. But then there's always going to be parts of that material that aren't required in that process. And this is what starts to happen. The same as the cooperative, the re-economy stuff that we were listening to before. You get different ways of doing things. And another key part of kind of cradle to cradle and circular economy thinking is to do with cycles. Because everything that we do is in a cycle. It's not, as most things in business are, where there's this trickery and it's like, I sold you this thing and now I've got nothing to do with it, because that's a very linear pattern. We took something, we made it into something else, and now somebody else is having to deal with it. With circular economy, with cradle to cradle, you start to think, actually, we haven't got much of this kind of stuff left anymore. We've mined all the copper, we've like put it all into pipes, we made it into copper wires, all this kind of stuff. We need to start to think, how the heck are we going to get this stuff back? You know, when I want to make another copper thing in the future, where is all the copper? So you have to start to look at these kind of questions. I don't know if you've got any examples of that, because you look quite a lot at waste streams in the kind of projects that you do. I mean, Kieran makes, like the solar showers out there, is made out of kind of cast-offs of other industries, building industries. So Kieran went and found some rather lovely bits of cast-offs, I must say. They don't look like scrap, and made it into something really useful, which is this idea of taking things and upcycling them. We mentioned before about downcycling. With a little bit of intelligence, you can actually start to think, how do I give this thing value? How do I actually retain this stuff into the future? Some of this stuff as well, we don't even know what to do with it in the future. At the moment, we just need to kind of bank it. So we need to know where it all is. We need to make it some kind of inventory, maybe, just to know where all the stuff is. And some of the things there's a new book called The Upcycle, which is, go on, you throw something in there.
Just before Paul starts going on about The Upcycle, which is a new book that he loves so much, I'd just like to say that with relation to what he was just saying, there is a body in the UK well, they're called NISP. The drum's pretty loud. They're called NISP, and that stands for the National Industrial Symbiosis Program. So you can go to them and they will look for, if you say, well, this is my waste, these are my inputs, these are my outputs, they will look for another local company or maybe even a national company who will actually go, yeah, we want what you're throwing out and we will take it. I mean, the classic one is heat. There's actually in Shepton Mallet near here, I learned the other day, as I went to the Lido with my family on a very sunny day, my friend Jethro goes, well, he turned to me and goes, did you know this pool is heated from that factory next door? And that's just a sort of an example where heat can be reused. I mean, the amount of heat we throw away unnecessarily is ridiculous. So, NISP, that's all I wanted to say really. And other ways of adding value. One other example I've been working on is the Tetra Shack out there. The Tetra Shack takes discarded juice cartons and and turns them into a building, which lasts longer than a Tetra Pak. I mean, a Tetra Pak's usage is, as Paul was saying earlier, is not very long from the time that you pick it up on the supermarket shelf, drink it, and then discard it, and it can't be recycled. So I thought, well, why don't we try and do something with it? We'll use it as a tile. That was just my 2 little points. Paul, upcycling.
Okay, so one of the key things though with Cradle to Cradle and the upcycle, and like the title of this new book which just come out this year is called The Upcycle Beyond Sustainability, Designing for Abundance. What these guys are talking about is actually we need to go beyond this idea of sustainability, because sustainability is just this idea of maybe even removing human beings out of the picture. If we go for zero, it's like zero emissions, it's like zero pollution, it's like, actually, we're in a quite dire situation at the moment, and we need to go beyond this idea of zero. We need to go beyond the idea of, have we just got enough? Because that's what sustainability is, really. It's like, it's not degrading, but it's sustaining. So sustainability is another thing that was kind of, we kind of discussed all this kind of stuff. We all sat around and we talked about it. We go, oh, this is really bad. What should we do? We need this thing called sustainability. And most people didn't really understand it. It was difficult. It was very complicated. And I think it's a bit like carbon trading. The people that dream up some of this stuff, carbon trading is classic because it was actually dreamt up by the same people that were dreaming up these financial things that have gone awry. So we kind of like looked for people that messed up the system, and then we went, well, how can we do carbon trading? And they went, well, we could use it as an opportunity to make some more money. And that's what they did. They pretty much designed a system that was based on their old ways of looking at the world. And what we want to talk really about is actually having a new set of eyes, because a little while ago I mentioned this idea that I had old frightened eyes. When I was campaigning, I was always trying to push people in the other direction. It was always kind of like, this is really bad. It's like we need to do something about this thing. My new eyes, when I read this story, it was like, actually, my eyes opened and I had like a new set of kind of not frightened eyes, but like quite hopeful eyes. And Shane spoke about this as well when we were asking about, can we have examples? How do when we've gone through transition, what is it we're transitioning to? What is this vision going to be like? If we can actually redesign this thing into this kind of utopian vision that's never going to exist, but it's kind of, we need somewhere to head for. We don't really want to head for living in caves and stuff like this. I know there's lots of people that sort of say, oh, it needs to be wild living, it needs to be this kind of thing, it needs to be that. You can't sell that to the majority of people. It might be very romantic, and it might be kind of like, for a small percentage of people, we might be able to get this stuff together and feel slightly better. But the majority of the population, can you see them coming along for that ride? I'm not sure. So, in the meantime, we need some strategy. We need some strategy of hope, we need some strategy of abundance, and ways of kind of transitioning from what we've got at the moment, which is pretty dire. We've got really, really high quality things being mined out of the ground, often in places that we can't actually get to. So what do? We'll set up like a system that probably ends up in warfare. We end up going into this place and digging up like pristine bits of this beautiful planet of ours so we can get this thing. Sorry? Yeah, we can take questions. We'll go.
With the remarketing of a high street capitalist company, and that we usually waste our time discussing that. But you're going to take the question. It's seems to me one other point that I'm going to make that seems to me more pertinent at the moment is the obsolescence of tech goods. The fact that you buy a pair of speakers for 60 quid, 2 years ago or something, and someone say, yeah, you'll never, if something goes wrong, you can't repair it. No one's there to repair it. And I grew up with much older parents who fixed tellies when they first came on the scene, and everyone knew someone who could do that stuff. I think we need, one thing to be brought up is the thing about the DIY culture and the marketing of that. I don't think B&Q could become a kind of mass handyman fleet and make it work. And I don't think they'd be interested in it. I'm interested in the fact you've brought that up, but I actually think we're going down the wrong road of looking to B&Q to remarket themselves to solve our problems. I'm going to get that.
Right, I mean, we run into this in nearly every talk, don't we? B&Q are powerful.
Let's not think more about obsolescence, waste, ability to actually sustain our own thing.
So, for example, the first point, we need to make this change happen. It's not just going to be a man with a van and like small well, there is of course a huge amount of the people who take their own responsibility, who start their own business, who say, right, I'm going to make beer and I'm going to do it locally, I'm going to get the hops from over there, or I'm going to...
Like microeconomy, artisan.
Sure, there is definitely going to be that, but ultimately the reason we talk about large capitalist evil companies, whatever, is because those companies need to change. Now, I think one of the big problems with those companies is that they have shareholders who put in investment and they want money back for just putting money in. I don't think that. I think that's where the system is broke. That people with money can make things happen just because they want more money back. I don't think that's that's. Is that kind of answer how I think about the first thing? Like, so...
in response to what I'm hearing.
Okay, well, ultimately, the people in B&Q, the workforce, 5,000, 10,000 people, the people in the government, the people in IKEA, the people in all these companies, Toyota, Rolls-Royce, that's a lot of people. And either we who run our little local businesses, man with van, whatever we do, we need them to change. So that's why we talk about them changing, because if we don't engage them, we won't, we'll go to war. Do you want to go to war with B&Q? Come on. They'd gain us.
Hello, I'd just like to make a comment on this debate that's going on really. There's a tension between targeting commercial decision makers and CSR departments within large corporations, and I, on ethic and principle, agree with your point. Like, the framework of a free market is not really the ideal place to use as a platform to propagate values, intrinsic values that are to do with enshrining sustainability and citizen thinking. And we're not consumers, we're citizens, so I feel like that one of the counter approaches is to think about how do we repoliticise a citizenship, not a consumer base, to hold governments to account, transparent account, for calling for really clear tactical policy change that regulates the companies that we're talking about in debate here. Yes, we need insider strategic redefining of sustainable upcycling design processes within the institutions that dictate our markets. But more importantly, we need to remember that we're politicised individuals that can make, I'm not an idealist. I know it's friggin' hard to change policies in our current government. I'm really not going to say, oh, we're mobilising great political ideology and opinion or result in quick change, but we need to have these proposals to ministers and governments in question and act in democracy, not just consumer dependency on changing the framework of a free market model. And I think that's really important to remember, and that's why your response kind of summoned a feeling in me to clarify, yeah, we need change from within the system, but we also need to be politicised and have really clear, unified and argument in solidarity towards the individuals that can make legislative change to regulate regulatory intervention. And it's an ongoing debate, you know, change from within, change from the top, regulatory intervention, but that's what I would advocate collectively. So.
I think what I feel is just don't leave anyone out of the debate. You know, don't scorn and don't try to set up too many boundaries between people. But that's just sort of who I am. So everyone sees it their own way, and I absolutely feel if people do set up those boundaries, they've got their important place too. You know, people who do go to protest and you know, that's a very important part too. Direct action, of course, has achieved many things. So I can't remember the second point though.
The second point. Yeah, the second point. So there were just 2 points that I was responding to what I'd heard. First was essentially that I don't think it's the time and place for us here now to be bothered about a main high street campus high street company restructuring to solve our problems. Our problems are going to be solved by us working individually and collectively and sort of change our consciousness to adapt. You know, B&Q are never going to, you know, they're in it for what they're in it for.
I remember your second point.
But the second point, which seems to me a glaring environmental issue, it's something I haven't replaced a tiny pair of speakers for a laptop because I'm thinking, well, I paid 70 quid or 80 quid or something a few years back, and someone said, well, I know there can't be much wrong with them. Someone said, but you can't get them fixed because it's cheaper to just buy something for 40 quid that will be just as good now. And this is a problem. But I'm going to just add one more thing, which I've made beds and done. I'm doing green work, although I'm sort of kind of fringe active with the left, have been. But what I see is small independent moves in a household, a shared household, where people just start to do things like change the growing space and do stuff. That, just as a simple act, brings people in. I mean, just dealing with plants, people, socially, you know, people pitch up with plants and stuff.
Absolutely, and I completely agree with all that stuff because it's basically if you put people out in the garden, then their relationship with the planet becomes a whole lot. But what I wanted to respond to was this idea of obsolescence, because when we did this mad project where we hooked up with some of these guys in America using some equipment at Sunrise Festival a few years ago, and there's a company in the UK called Very PC. Now, VPC have heard a lot of these stories, and they're like, we want to try and change the way we do computing. So they've got the first computers that don't use PVC in their computer. Now, we kind of got them to come to the festival. They're a business, you know. They're like, well, why would they bother coming along to, you know? They probably think they might get the odd sale or something. I don't know, but they came. And we used their equipment because I wanted to show people that there was an alternative in the computing world. I mean, it's very complicated in things like computers and TVs and all this stuff because they're such complicated products. And when we explained this to them, when we did this live Skype hookup thing with MPDC, which is a design consultancy in America, that work out how you do this kind of stuff, afterwards I was having a conversation with the guy who runs this business, and he was like, wow, this light bulb had come on in his head about how this could work in a computing industry. Instead of Intel making like this chip, and then the next week they make it that shape, and then they make it this shape, if Intel actually didn't sell me that chip, if they actually just leased me that chip, right? What we're doing is we're using the service of their chip. It then becomes beneficial for them to make it fit the next time, because they take it back, they upgrade it and give it you back. So they start to look at this idea of obsolescence in a completely different way. Obsolescence was invented in the 1950s. When the American system became so efficient, we were chasing efficiency, they suddenly discovered that actually they could make stuff so cheaply with efficiency that they'd have to either give it away to people or trick you. And this was, I kind of just spoke about it briefly in thing, but it's trickery basically.
I mean, just another sort of experience I find. You go into like a Gap store and you see people treating it like a jumble sale, and there's something kind of wrong when you go into a place where you know garments are being made under duress in an exploitative way, and you see people treating that environment like in a very, very disrespectful way, and there's something wrong, you know, in that process.
I think what it is what's wrong in that is what I call the motivational fire. It's basically you have to ask, why do these businesses even exist in the first place? And at the moment, their motivational fire is, like Kieran was saying, is to return profit to their shareholders. So they have to kind of wear blinkers when they're doing this stuff, like, because everybody that works for all of these evil empires and stuff, if you actually got them all to come and sit in this room, you wouldn't see any difference. You can't actually see. They haven't got like a different kind of look about them even. They're exactly the same. They're actually human beings, you know, and they just find themselves in this position. They've been tricked into this idea that, you know, they have to go and do something, so they train and they whatever, you know, and the system at the moment puts them into a position which is laden with debt, and they're like, well, how do I service this debt? And this is like the foundation of all of this stuff. If your main motivation is to service the debt, you're going to look for any way possible. I mean, just before I left here, everyone would have seen this campaign go out virally all over the place, but Avaz did this thing where, you know, it's like they're talking about digging up the barrier reef because there's coal underneath it, you know? And it's like, my response to that was like, are these guys truly insane? You know, but actually the realization is our insanity is shared in this thing, because as long as we are complacent in using fossil fuel, they will always try and find you a fossil fuel. And if they can make money out of fossil fuel, they'll dig up the barrier reef. You know, you can guarantee it. They're already doing it with tar sands and stuff. They're doing it. They're like exploding rocks to get little tiny pockets of gas out. This is insanity we're talking about here. We're actually complicit in this. We all are. We all came here some way. Some of us might have ridden bikes here. We might have like walked here. But you're all probably wearing shoes that have got some kind of fossil fuel component to them. So until we actually start to go, hang on a minute, we need to take responsibility. And I can't remember where this quote comes from, but it's not. And I think Chris talks about this, Chris Paradox, where he says it's not our fault, but it's our responsibility. So we all need to be responsible for this stuff. We can't just like go, oh, you guys, this part of the system's evil, that's wrong, let's go and grow some vegetables, we might be a bit better. Because ultimately the rest of it is all falling apart around us. We end up in transition. We do 300 communities, did somebody say earlier? It's incredible that 300 communities are talking to each other. You know, a few years ago, before transition, before 2005 or when it was, people were kind of in complete isolation, silos. So transition starts to kick off. It's like this dual thing of like peak oil and climate change. Shit, let's do something about it. People start to talk to each other, and where I came across these stories, this story of Cradle to Cradle, my initial thing was, transition to what? Okay, so my research when I did my master's was looking at cradle to cradle ideas, because I thought it seemed a bit like permaculture. And I was like, well, transition is built on permaculture. So my research, right, was I did a comparison study between permaculture and cradle to cradle principles, when actually this is the same stuff. These guys were reading the same authors back in the 70s when the environmental movement started. Things like the Silent Spring stuff and all these different authors that were inspiring the environmental movement, inspired permaculture ideas. It also inspired cradle to cradle ideas. So when I did this comparison study, I actually discovered that this is actually the same thing, it's just been called something different. So surely the transition communities know about permaculture. Wouldn't it be great if they knew also about cradle to cradle? Because cradle to cradle is about, we could actually start to do businesses with each other. You could get all these transition communities building the turbines for the future, looking at the things that we actually need in this place that we vision. They could do it in this kind of joined up circular economy type of business, which is why I was like, I need to go and talk to the transition community. So my research was like, this is the similarities. You guys at Transition, do you recognize the fact that you understand permaculture? And the majority in 2008 basically said, well, we don't really understand permaculture. And this is fundamental. I think everybody within Transition need to go and really in-depthly look at permaculture, and then try and apply that really deeply into everything that they do. Because this is what Cradle to Cradle is happening in business, it's happening in Davos, in the mountains. It's like where these business leaders meet and discuss this stuff, which we all go, oh my God, the Dark Lords are meeting in the mountain again, they're plotting something evil for the future. Actually, they're talking about circular economy, they're talking about, what the hell are we going to be doing in 10 years' time? Because we're surely not going to be doing this anymore, because we're going to run out of all this stuff. We're going to start, somebody was talking earlier about mining landfill. There's companies out there that are thinking, how the hell do we mine this stuff out of landfill? And in this new book, The Upcycle, which is basically the way they describe it is, it's like 10 years on. I mean, Cradle to Cradle is an old story now. It was written in 2002. Yeah.
What would the
Can we just
what would the use of mined landfill be?
Basically looking for the materials that we need to do the things that we want to do.
There's more ore in landfill, in old ones, pre-1950s, I think, than there is on any part of the earth anymore. So it's easier to get out of landfill. Pre-1950s, because after that, a landfill, they took all the iron out for recycling.
Alright, my comment's going back a little bit now to the built on obsolescence, but I think it links very much into transition movements and empowering people, which is that, I used to work in a reuse centre, a small centre in East London, and we were doing bikes and small electronic fixing and repairing. We've actually stopped doing most of that now, apart from demonstration, because if anything's wrong with it more than a fuse, it's so difficult to get apart, or it's so difficult to get them, to make it valuable enough to us to be able to sell it again. But there's sort of a rise of like repair cafe, repair party type structures where people are sort of sharing skills. You bring along your broken thing, you might know how to fix it, or you might realise there's no point in fixing it, but at least people are sort of getting the idea that actually maybe this thing could be fixed or not. Because I think even the basic skill of changing a fuse, so many people don't even consider that, like the amount of stuff we would get in because the fuse didn't work or there's a crack in a cable and very easy things to fix, and people just don't know how to do that anymore. So it's how do the people that do know or are interested enough to learn and check YouTube and do it, how do we get other people involved in doing that? Also want to add, part of the reason we stopped doing it for selling back to people on low incomes was because we've stopped getting our source from the council tips, and they would put things aside. Then DHL started this big collection for waste electronic goods, which is great, so people know they don't have to throw their toast in the bin, they can throw it in this bank, but that's all going to recycle, not to reuse. And yeah, I mean, so there's good signs, more people know that this stuff can be recycled, but there's also a lot of stuff that could be fixed going there, not coming to small groups that could have fixed it.
Okay, brilliant. So, I don't know if I've really got a response to that particular thing, apart from to say what these ideas are about are actually saying maybe fixing some of this stuff might be a bad idea anyway, because it might have been designed in the old paradigm. It was designed basically to sell you cheap shit stuff, yeah? So it's actually poisonous. So there's lots and lots, and this is what's happening at the moment. We're putting stuff into recycling. Where does it go? Does anybody know where this stuff goes to? Loads of it goes to like third world countries, and there's children kind of pulling lead out of it and stuff. It isn't a good design. It's basically, it's firefighting an old paradigm design.
Yeah, I think it's illegal to ship stuff abroad in the process. If that is happening, it's not illegal. In theory, for a DHL collectively is being at least taken to the process plant in the UK, then be redistributed as new material.
Yeah, cool. And the reason that they're starting to think of that rather than send it to Africa or China or wherever it is, and quite a lot of it, when recycling first started, there was like constant stories of whole container ships full of this stuff going back. Because the majority, there's a kind of crazy fact, I don't know if everybody's seen the story of stuff, but like most products, they last for something like 6 months or something, and then they end up in landfill. So all these really complicated things that they've made in the marketplace, the obsolescence trick, it lands in landfill because they haven't got any business to do after they've sold it to you the first time. They want to sell you another one. Yeah? So what this new paradigm is actually, if I don't have to trick you into buying this cheap shit one, why don't I have a discussion with you? What is it that you actually want? You want computing. Yeah? You don't actually want to own 60,000 chemical components and bits of metal and all this. You actually want to do the computing in the best possible way, you want the best service. So new ideas start to spring out of this kind of discussion. And what's happened at the moment, and what's really quite exciting, there's this thing called the circular economy. And there's a woman who sailed a boat around the world, and there's a connection back with B&Q again here. B&Q actually sponsored Helen MacArthur. And the reason that B&Q was mentioned was because they're one of the founding partners of the Helen MacArthur Foundation, along with Renault and Philips and all sorts of people. Because they're thinking, hang on a minute, how do we do business in the future? You know, you can question their motivation, whatever, but they're just thinking about their future. They're not thinking about this quarter. They're thinking we need to put some R&D into what we're going to be doing in 10 years' time. So these enlightened businesses, Ellen MacArthur went to them and they went, let's set up this foundation, because this idea of circular economy and cradle to cradle, we need to tell the kids about this stuff. What the foundation does, it goes to schools and it says, you guys haven't got all the baggage of what we've just lived through. What about this story? How do we make things that we can take apart? How do we make things that when we want to put them back into the system, they're not going to poison us? So they do these things called tear down workshops with kids. So they take a mobile phone apart and say, well, how would you design this in the future so that it's easier to deconstruct, so that it can easily go to be different products. So it's not, it's like an iPhone 53 or whatever the next one will be, like, because it's slightly better, it's shiny. It's actually like, well, just give us that one back and you have this one. And you get into a kind of completely different relationship. And like, people can argue that, would I really want to be in a relationship with Apple or with like all these kind of people? But having a relationship with some of these people, maybe we can feed back. So maybe it's not such a bad thing to be in a relationship with a business that's supplying you with something that you want. If it is something that you really want and something that you really need, like computing or watching something, you know what I mean? But you'd probably start to question some of the things that you were actually doing. I mean, I was at this conference in Frankfurt in 2008 or whatever it was, and the guy from Air France says, oh, we're going to build sustainable aircraft because we realised that flying is like having this huge impact and it's like creating all these problems in the system. We're going to have sustainable aircraft. We're going to grow our own fuels and stuff. And the people were like, okay, So you're going to grow biofuels and you're going to put it into planes, and you're also going to like increase the number of flights. Which part of the food chain are we going to disrupt here when you're actually growing this biofuel? The problem is you're transfixed in this old design that was designed in the old paradigm, the design when we got access to fossil fuel. Yeah, it was like, how do we do this stuff quicker, faster, bigger? How do we do that stuff? What you need to work out is, how do we do mobility in the future? You might not do it in a plane, you might not do it with fossil fuel. Maybe we won't have quite so much mobility. Do we need it? You know, is it actually, we've been very lucky, and loads of people use mobility all the time. It's like, it's so accessible to everybody because it's cheap. So we do it. But do we actually need it? Possibly we don't, I would argue. Especially if we're going through transition, especially if we've got climate change, we've got like 400 parts per million carbon in the atmosphere. We've never had 400 parts of carbon in the atmosphere for, I don't know what the figure is, but we weren't actually, there wasn't human beings on the planet before. So we're in this like unknown territory. What we're gonna try and figure out is, how the hell do we get it back? How do we design like mobility that gets that stuff back and puts it into the soil or puts it into the biota on the planet? Because these are the design goals that we need to set our collective intelligence on. Not, you going? Would you like to say anything else before you leave?
Ultimately, at the end of the day, we're only designing for us, for health. That's it, isn't it? I mean, we've only got ourselves to blame if we fuck it up, so we're designing for ourselves. I suppose we're summing up here what you're saying. Thank you, Paul. Thank you for listening. I'm going now. Bye.
Cheers, Kieran. So, I don't know, I mean, I've really spoken a lot about the actual bits and pieces of Cradle to Cradle. It's just kind of, I just told you that it's a story. There's a book and stuff. I got some copies if people want to look at it, but I could go into a little bit more about what it actually is, because what it is kind of like designing things in the biosphere and in the technosphere, which is like basically saying, hang on a minute, what is pollution? Pollution is a fault in the system. It's when bits that are technical leak into the biosphere, yeah? And that's pretty much it. That's what pollution is. It's when we put things that we've made and it gets into the wrong bit of the system. The biosphere exists. We need to kind of try and replenish it. We need to re-nourish it. We need to try and work out ways. If we want technical things, we need to keep them in isolation from the biosphere to start with. As a kind of fundamental thing. Another fundamental thing is that we need to stop using fossil fuel. At the moment, well, not necessarily stop using it. We've used half of it. We're at this kind of peak, and people talk about peak oil and whatever, but it actually means we've kind of used half, and we've got the other half available. What's going on at the moment with fracking and tar sands and stuff, that's just trying to supply this kind of addiction at the top end. You know, they're making huge profits. These companies that are doing these insanity projects, they're actually making more profit than they've ever made in their whole life. That's why they're doing these things. And there's whole kind of debates about all that kind of stuff. But we want to decide what our future's going to look like. You know, we've all got an input into that as individuals. We can all actually all influence in everything that we do. So every time you think, I need this thing, it's kind of like, actually, do we need this thing? Do I need that, or do I actually need something else? Do I need a cuddle? You know, is it like, am I buying this thing because I actually need a little bit of attention? Is it like, has somebody designed some kind of advertising campaign that makes me feel inadequate? You know, that's why I buy this product. It's actually, you probably didn't need it, ultimately, because ultimately you kind of need shelter, you need food, nourishment, you know. And then you start to look at comfort. A lot of comfort things that we have grew out of this paradigm of access to loads of fossil fuel. What a party, you know. It was like, we could do anything. We could fly to the moon, you know. We could do absolutely anything. But is that actually good? Is that a good use of the other half? Potentially not. Got a question?
Yeah, thanks. I can see that you and your colleague have, like most people here, an incredible sense of creativity about thinking about how we might do things differently. But every time you raise the problem, which is, well, the problem is that there were investors with shares and they want to take profits out of the system. But then that's the fundamental. But then you stop and you go back. You don't think about, my question is, have you applied your creativity to how we might design or re-engineer the system of production which excludes profit, which excludes shareholders? We want a new system of production, not new toys that B&Q can sell us.
Absolutely. Profit is kind of a motivational tool. I mean, most people that are in business use profit to motivate their business to succeed. So if we can use profit,
I think we're talking classic Marxism.
Maybe, I don't know. I mean, I think there's a lot of people out there discussing this kind of stuff, and the reason I talk about cradle to cradle and these kind of things is because actually it gets people's back up quite often talking about B&Q and Unilever and all these kind of people that, that everybody's like, they're the problem. They're actually human beings. They're just motivated by that thing, yeah? So the profit thing, if you design something truly to be cradle to cradle, for instance, the profit has to be profitable to society. It's a fundamental principle of this. Cradle to cradle is a framework of design, yeah? If you design something with cradle to cradle ideals, the profit is to the ecology, to the society, and to the economy, because if you don't have profit in an economy, I'm not saying about the shareholder economy, I'm talking about the motivation to keep doing this thing on a daily basis, because if you didn't have some kind of motivation, we're all motivated to come to these things and have these kind of discussions and stuff. What would be the motivation for the majority of people to go out on a 9 to 5 basis and do the thing they do? What motivates them? They're locked into some kind of cycle, aren't they? So you've got to look at how we motivate people to do these things in the future. And at the moment, profit is there. It seems to be a huge motivator for people. You look at, there's not many people that aren't involved in something that there's some kind of profit. I mean, if this festival is profitable, we could do it again. Yeah? It's not built for profit. But if it costs money, if it doesn't financially make sense, eventually we won't be able to do it again. So you do need to look at the leverage between all of these discussions and how we're going to do it next year. You do have to have a motivational tool in this thing. And what the profit thing is in cradle to cradle design is you've got to have this triangle. There's a sheet I can give you and stuff. You design it for profit for society.
No, a worker doesn't work for himself.
Sorry, so the answer you've given me is, I asked you, could you you said the system, the problem is that there are shareholders and they want profits, okay? So I said, let's think about designing a system that doesn't have profit, and you said, no, we've got to have a system that's motivated by profit. So the answer is, no, you haven't.
Okay, but what system are you proposing? What system is going to replace the current one for the majority of people? Yeah, we're in transition here. It's like in the future we may not need this motivational tool because the majority of people aren't going to roll over. When you give them your utopian vision, what is your utopian vision that's going to motivate people that has got no profit in it, right? We've got a project that we run. It's called Rust. You can invest in a community share. It's a community land-based thing. You can invest money in it, right? There's no profit, financial profit, because the profit is social housing, okay? But we find it really difficult to get people to invest in it. So we find it really difficult to build social housing. Because how do I motivate you to give me 500 quid when we're going to use it to make social housing? In 20 years' time, I'll give you your 200 quid, your 500 quid, whatever it is back. But what's your motivation to lend it to me? This is the interesting thing about this debate. We've got two hands up there, because hopefully you might have some answers. Because I don't know, how do I motivate you without some of these tools?
Just commenting on the illustrations you gave to describe models of profit. Like, I feel using the example of this festival, if we don't make enough profit doing this festival, we can't do it again, versus the question about, are we going to be collaborating and working with really large multinational corporations seeking enormous profit? they're very different models of pursuing profit. And I think to use the example of this festival as needing to generate a degree of sustainable revenue to refund itself is completely different from the model of a huge international corporation pursuing obscene levels of hideously immoral profit. So I just want to say I don't think it was that useful to refer to this festival as a model for, let me just finish a second, for profit. And I think what we're discussing here as a group versus a speaker or a few other views is, you know, the difference between, yeah, we need profit to make sustainable enterprise and projects and community initiatives work. We need returns, for sure. But the scale of distribution of who owns what control over generating what financial profit margins to what percentage, and that's why I personally feel like we shouldn't be operating within the free market constraints, because the priority is to generate as much financial profit as possibly we can as a huge corporation at the expense of all other degrees of natural and social well-being and welfare. And I think we need to generate revenue for alternative transition community projects. Great, we do. We need to pay fair wages and pay our overheads. But the proportion of who's controlling what pursuit of what margins of profit is the key question of who we work with. And I just felt it wasn't that useful. I made my point. I don't need to